All right, everyone, welcome again. If you've been on already today or at one of our previous Virtual Insights conferences, or just welcome if you have not. My name is Courtney Thabit. I am with Accelerant Research, and we are doing our, I don't even know what number Virtual Insights conferences is. We do quite a few. Some kind of ground rules that we have. We like everyone right now, we are at the mercy of the tech. Luckily, it's gone a little bit smoother as we've done more, and as COVID has gone along, we've all gotten used to this. But we still, there's still glitches sometimes. We do ask that everyone be respectful, obviously of us, of the person hosting, of each other, of everyone, really. And please, we ask you to use this venue to network with one another, to engage with the talks, to interact. You can do so on Twitter, on LinkedIn, through chat here, all of that. And as we go through the presentation, if you have questions, there is a Q&A or the chat feature, and you can put your questions in there, and I will share those with our presenter at the end of her presentation. So right now, I am excited to introduce Jami Peets. She is a senior user experience researcher, and she's going to talk to us today about collaborative synthesis. And so I am going to hand it over to Jami, and she will present her slides. Thanks, Jami. And
awesome. Hello. Courtney, thank you so much for that intro. So feel free, if the format is amenable, if there are any questions that come up, would love to be interrupted by them. This original format was a workshop where we were discussing things and sharing and collaborating on collaboration. Imagine that. So Courtney, if you're able to feed some questions through, feel free to interrupt or
absolutely.
In the chat, happy to answer things as they come up. Awesome. Great. I will share my screen on my side. Are you able to grant sharing on my side, please? All right. Awesome. Hey there, so my name is Jami Peets. I'm a user experience researcher in financial services and have been there for the last few years. Oh, I didn't realize this had interaction in it. That's fun. So I work for a financial services company right now within the innovation lab. And so what we're focused is on coming up with new ideas within a relatively short amount of time, few months, and testing iteratively within small teams of 3 to 6. And so my perspective has been changed quite a bit in this environment where we have to quickly get in sync with each other in order to understand where we're all at and how to best move forward based off of our research. So I'm really excited to share with you today some collaborative methods, and we all have our own unique tool sets. And so I'm hoping today what we can do is build off of this and just refresh ourselves. Sometimes it's good to go back to the basics and say, oh yeah, like I forgot this was something that I used to do in my practice, or hey, maybe this is a new method I want to try in the next few months with my team. So we're really here to spark ideas with each other. At the end of each section, I'll give a time where folks can say, contribute additional ideas or methods so that we can kind of build our tool sets out. So we're staying fresh with new methodologies and new ways of really working with our teams that get us aligned and also really engaged about the work. That's one of the most important things for me. All right, so have you ever had the experience where you have delivered your findings and then nothing happens? I feel like this is a common kind of story we hear in user research. It's like you do all this work and then you deliver the findings, and it's not well received, it's against biases, it might cost the company more money, there's friction. And so there's so many reasons that kind of lead to this moment. And so if we can proactively think about how to engage people along that journey, along the research journey, whether that's a high level stakeholder or maybe a project manager that's kind of in that mid-level, or even team members to have on your side to advocate for users with you. So this is to kind of mitigate that whole dumping of research and here are all the findings. It's trying to bring people along in the appropriate ways. So this talk really is primarily geared towards UX researchers, but also the contributors that are close to them. So these are for collaborative cross-functional teams and people who are willing to take risks, try new methodologies, be vulnerable, make mistakes. It's all in the mix. So this is not really about how to teach other team members how to do your job. It's not about getting buy-in for user research or strong arming stakeholders to do user research right away, but it's about getting collaborative right now and being able to talk through different methodologies that work for us. Obviously, you all know this. We want to make sure that we're on the same page. This is why we do this. I think there's also some bonding that happens when we learn together. So we are putting ourselves in a vulnerable spot when we say that we don't know something. We have hypotheses, but then when we're wrong together, it's like we can band together about something and then take the appropriate steps to make sure that we are making that thing right, or at least figuring out what are the next possible actions based off of that learning. And essentially, the whole goal of this is to get to that action, that point of action where it dawns on everyone, oh, we need to take this action because we learned this together. So really, this is such a unifying thing to do for your teams. And there's so many ways to do this, especially with the breadth and depth of, or the many different types of researchers and personalities and strengths that we each have. We can bring different things to the table to our teams. So first of all, thinking about some of the factors. So first, making sure that you are set on objectives and that you know what you're really driving for. If you have really tight timelines, it might not be amenable to bringing people along, or there might be ways to bring them along, but just in a way that doesn't take more of your time. So there might be some delegation that can happen. So constraints having to do with time, budget, those things kind of determine the shape of your study, obviously, and then who you might invite. And so when you're thinking about participants and the format of your study, you've got to think about how are you going to actively and meaningfully place them within your activities so that they're learning and progressing, but also bringing to the body of knowledge to the group in a productive way. So you're always balancing these kind of three things, and your collaboration is not going to look different, is not going to look the same for each project. So what's fun about this is that we get to adapt and be flexible and change things up. And so instead of a rinse and repeat, like you're going to take the notes, all right, you're going to synthesize, we can actively change the roles up and think about it differently each time based off of the kind of studies that we're running. So I find that a fun challenge to like figure out where all of the pieces fit in and how people can contribute. So I just broke down my research process, probably similar to yours, the planning phase, learning phase, and then how do you apply those learnings. And so within these, I've broken it down to even more specific steps. And so what we'll go over today, I will not be able to share activities for all of the parts of the process, but where these teal boxes are, that's where we'll really dive in deep and share some methodologies with each other. So let's first talk about in the planning part of the process. So this is where you're really setting those objectives and you're figuring out, okay, what should we even learn? And one of the things that I've done that's been super helpful is setting a whole bunch of, or becoming aware of all of the team's assumptions. And so you get everyone to write out their assumptions about a specific topic area, and then all these biases start to come through. And what this helps us do is it understands where our viewpoints are at the beginning. And then at the end of the experiment, we can return back to this and say, this is where we were wrong. This is where we were right. This is where we need more information. This is where we were partially right. And I find this a very rich activity because you get to know people and their beliefs, but then you also get to see how the team progresses through being wrong. And so like this vulnerability is incredibly helpful in understanding where the team needs to go, but also like how to work well with one another. I'll take a pause here. Are there any questions that are coming up? I might be missing in the chat. Courtney, anything, or I'll just keep plowing through? Oh, no questions. All right, cool.
I mean, I'll ask a question.
Yeah.
What
No
kind of
pressure.
assumptions have you heard from like people in the company that you've worked with?
Yeah, I mean, they vary. It's like the type of guidance that people need, or the things that people want or care about. They're kind of all over the place. And so what I've learned is like sometimes people's thoughts are just like not even within the scope of what we're really looking at. And so sometimes what I'll have to do is group some of the thoughts together, push some away and say, hey, this is not really for now or for later. But what we really need to focus on are these three areas. I'm trying to think of some interesting things that I can talk about. I think assumptions about different types of investors within our population and what they want and how they want to engage with like learning how to become a better investor. We've had varied thoughts, and this basically comes from people's personal experiences. So if I talk with somebody who's a little bit more experienced, they're going to say, oh yeah, everyone knows like what a mutual fund is. That's fine. And then we have people on the team who are like on the other end of the spectrum, who are beginner investors, and they're like, they need guidance, they need education. And so then you get that nice wide spread. And then sometimes the truth is in the middle, but then sometimes it's a matter of like determining the audience and the persona and like who you're really aimed at. So you just get
that makes sense.
Such a variety in this. All right. Something else that's been incredibly instrumental is the learning plan. I took this from Leah Bewley. Some of these methods are also from 101 Design Methods by Vijay Kumar. Really awesome resource for pulling out ways to think and conceptualize and create models around what you're learning. I really love this because this is very actionable. So you start with your assumptions, and then that kind of gets you into the mindset of thinking about research questions. And I found that research questions are really hard for people to write unless they've had experience with. So I can't ask my product counterpart, hey, can you write the research question? It's not quite a natural skill. And so we need to definitely shore those up, get those prepared, and frame them in a way that people can really understand that these are not literal questions you're going to be asking people, but the larger research question that is at hand. And then what you do as a team is that you start to prioritize these in terms of importance. So how big of a risk is it going to be if we don't answer it? And then what I love about this is that the team can brainstorm about how to answer it. So it's not always user research that's the answer. Maybe it's competitive or market research that needs to get some more intel. Maybe it's some other type of experimentation. So people can kind of bring in their own skill sets and say like, hey, like, oh, I think I could go do like a literature review and review these 3 topics. And so then you assign names to it. And so then everyone can kind of break out and have ownership over the findings. And what's really cool is when these things start to come together, and that's the tricky part, right? Is like once you've divvied out and like gone out and divided and conquered, is coming back and then synthesizing together. But it can be really powerful if you have multiple ways in order to get at an answer, not just one method, but triangulating maybe from big data, data analytics, literature reviews, competitive, and from users. So getting multiple perspectives is incredibly helpful. All right, now is the time. Do you have any other things within this phase? So this is the phase where you're doing like that upfront planning. Do you have any other methods that you use? Or do you have any tips or tricks, or maybe even questions about any of the activities that were presented here? All right. No comments. All right, well, as you keep thinking things through, and if you want to share different methodologies, please feel free to put them in the chat. Would love to hear different ideas about how to approach different types of problems. All right, moving on. So now this is the bulk of the experimentation, and this is probably where most of us are familiar with collaborating with team members. A lot of us might do like watch parties. I've heard of like fun, getting on like company couch and then the TV and then having popcorn and watching user testing and taking notes. So that's the typical thing I hear most often, but this can take a variety of forms in the way that we conduct research, right? So like a contextual inquiry could look a lot different and might require a lot of planning, especially when you're bringing stakeholders along and travel is involved, versus like something like a moderated test within the office. And then of course, analyzing together and learning is an integral part of that. So a lot of us know we assign note takers to help us out with moderated interviews, but there are other different types of roles that we can assign. So I'd like to just have people be involved in small ways so that we can kind of all have ownership around it. It also kind of makes the day where we have tons of interviews go a little bit smoother if everyone's kind of pitching in. So I like to have a head note taker, depending on how many people you have. I put a lot of these roles out here. It doesn't mean that you have like 6 people to help you every time. What a luxury. But essentially you're having someone own the notes. And so I'll typically create a mural board. So that's the digital whiteboard that's available online. And I'll set up the board in a way that shows my whole protocol or the set of guided questions. And then either any of the prompts or the probes or the prototypes, I'll include them in there so that my team members can follow along really easily. And then I'll color code each of the users, and then they're able to draw patterns on the board in real time. So start grouping similar thoughts and let that synthesize happen instead of toward the end. So now that my company is virtual, a lot of the synthesis is happening on these boards, which wasn't really a prevalent habit of ours. We were writing on either paper or just like Word documents, but now it's kind of in the centralized space that lets you organically kind of design it, the space and the conversation in a really natural way. It's been really, really nice. So I have a few of those templates that have been really helpful. If you're doing something like contextual inquiry, it is really nice to have a note taker and just be able to be the facilitator so that you're not focusing on getting the notes, but you can focus on the person and what you're really trying to get at. And you can also have like timekeepers. Sometimes stakeholder questions come through, especially virtually. I've heard people having like different Slack channels or different kind of messenger tools to aggregate those and figure out which questions to prioritize. Some of them are just like way off and you say, okay, we'll table that. Some of them might be really relevant and good questions to ask within the session. So that's that. I think a lot of us are familiar with that. And then with debrief, I want to make sure that it is fresh in people's mind. So after we've had some kind of interview or some kind of experimentation, I like to have a session right after and really let us process what we've heard. And so one of the easy ways is just say, like, have everyone share their top 3 thoughts. And so I'll give a few minutes just to let people think through, all right, what did I really learn here? And what's most helpful is you put the learning objective up front so that people can anchor on what is important versus what is not. Because you can have a lot of insights that are all over the place. Because I've noticed that like during studies, if people are not focused on the research question, they can just kind of be looking for different things according to their agenda or like what they're trying to accomplish with their specific business. But what this does is it says, hey, remember this research question we were trying to answer? Let's focus on that. What we're going to do is share out what we've learned, linking it back to that learning objective. And another really great thing that has worked really well is instead of sharing my thoughts 1, 2, 3, boom, 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 I'll just have someone share their first idea, and then I'll say, okay, does anyone have any similar thoughts to that? And then we've created a linkage that way. And then I'll say, does anyone have any similar or connected thoughts? Oh yeah, I have one. And so what's starting to happen is that they're starting to group thoughts and think around themes rather than this is my thought, that's your thought. We create these connections, we've bonded as a team, but we've also built our understanding and that cohesiveness and clarity that we need. And then what's neat is like, I'll do that with the second, I'll be like, pull out your second sticky. All right, is it similar or different to what you found? And so we'll start to draw those connections as we go. And so what you can really do is model that type of behavior instead of what is the bullet list? Let's list all of our findings, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. You're not really getting at that higher level analysis. And what's really neat about this is it's pretty lean. You can do this within 30 minutes. I'll usually do like a 1 hour interview and then a 30-minute debrief. And so like you're just getting at what matters more. Any longer than 30 minutes, I feel like the conversation is just, it's hard to maintain focus, especially after you've been like listening for so long. So getting at those higher level themes and that initial layer of analysis, I think this is great. It's also great for everyone's memory to refresh what we heard, just because there's so much that's said within an interview or contextual inquiry or whatever you're doing. And then cross-case analysis. This is something that goes a little bit deeper past traditional analysis. This is where you're really diving deep beyond the 3 thoughts, right? It's like where you're looking at all of your data together in aggregate, and you're starting to draw those higher level themes and patterns. And so it's not really natural for folks to be able to process this kind of data. And so you need to facilitate these types of conversations, right? And I've had in the past really big working spaces, like a big wall full of like literal stickies. And so like you can move them around and have discussions and like pick it off the wall and hey, what did you mean by this? And then you can argue out a point. Now we can do these on virtual boards, which sometimes is a little bit more productive because it's so easy to move things around and draw diagrams and yarn. And to start to see connections where maybe you wouldn't have been able to see before. So Excel, it only goes so far as making sense of some of this data, but I find it really helpful to be able to have an open space to put all of the thoughts out there. And we've also created a lot of models, or like visual models for what we found within Mural. So I think normally we would have just like sketched them out on paper and like drawn a rough model for how something works, or this is the client's mental model. What do you think about this? And then the other person can take it and say, no, that's not the pattern. It's this way. And so you're creating these kind of conceptual models in order to get on the same page. But this is like an activity that needs a lot of facilitation. It does better if you don't have as many people in the room. I would say probably no more than 4. Even 4 would be hard. Try to keep it somewhat limited, especially those who might be new to this. This could be really overwhelming. All right, I'll pause there. Any questions or thoughts or tips or tricks, other things that you've used in this? Oh, nice description. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so I because I'm gonna have questions, you know. Jamie, you had mentioned that you had gone, you know, from in person and kind of doing all that synthesizing, and you know, I imagine like around a whiteboard in a room with post-its and you know, moving things around. And what was the most important lesson learned in switching over from that in person into virtual?
Yeah, the biggest lesson is like, why didn't we use this tool earlier? It's so much easier. We were physically putting things up and it was just taking so much time. I think the lesson is that, like, don't hold on to your thoughts too easily, because it's like when you put a physical thing up, it almost seems to hold a little bit more legitimacy. In a digital space, it's so easy to move around and like just delete stuff. You become a lot less precious with things, and you say, oh, well, let me just copy this like little journey map I have and add a few things. You're not gonna have that fear of messing up, because it's like you can throw it all away. Whereas, I don't know, I felt like a little bit more precious when in the physical space. I just can't explain it. But, and then I guess the other thing would be, everyone has a voice, and it's easier for it to be honored on a board. So like, you're not completely anonymous. I mean, I know you can make some comments anonymous on these boards, but I like that people are able to have heads down time and to be able to write their own ideas regardless of any pressure like in the room. I know like ideation sessions, like sometimes it feels like a test, and like people are, you know, like you're looking around and they're like, oh my gosh, that person's got like 10 ideas and I have like 1 on my paper. I feel so dumb. But this remote like ideation kind of takes that pressure off, and it's just, okay, what do I need to focus on? And and it's actually removed. And so remote is just creating all these really interesting possibilities. Of course, it struggles too, but I'd say that everyone has a voice and the ideas are just not precious. Those are the main 2 takeaways with virtual work.
Awesome.
Great question. All right, moving on to taking action. So after we've learned everything, we've gone through synthesis, we've shared back, we've done consensus. Now we want to actually take action on what we've learned. And so this is a really simplistic tool. I need to get a few more in my tool belt, but essentially getting a to-do list has been helpful. I put it in one of my PowerPoints once, and I had like people's names assigned to it. And then somebody pinged me and was like, hey, I saw there was like a to-do list. Like, can we have a follow-up meeting about it? So that wasn't my optimal like interaction where it's like you dump things on people and you say, hey, you need to do this, you need to do that, you need to do that. What I would do, and I've iterated on this, is don't create that list yourself, but allow space at the end of kind of a findings session, or maybe it's a follow-up meeting, an action meeting, where your team starts to think about what needs to happen as a result. So you might have them in the back of your head. Maybe you've written a few out and categorized them according to like themes and like priorities. But then you have your team members actively say, hey, we need to do this, this, and this, and then let them decide and put their own names, so that there's this added kind of accountability. And so that the research is really all of ours, right? It's not mine, it's the teams. And so I think that can be really powerful when teams are proactively thinking about what they can do, instead of you having to like track that person down, follow up. We should be accountable to each other. So that's the idealistic like state. And then I would recommend doing that within a format where people can contribute actively. So I love any of the digital boards that you can use. If you have Kanban, whatever is the tool of choice, get people responsible for it and excited. I think like if you have learnings and then it's dead silent, it's like, okay, why is nobody engaged about this? Did you not hear what we need to do? Or like this, it should be engaging and it should be exciting in order to get these next steps. And so letting people determine, oh, I get it. You've helped me connect the dots. 1, 2, 3. That means this, this, and this. And sometimes it's not always clear what needs to happen. And so maybe not leaving it blank all of the time, that might not be the best approach. You might have to preload it with 1 or 2, maybe even 3, and they could even be higher level points, right? And then maybe tactically, the team can break them down more specifically. So you might provide overarching recommendations, and then the team might come at a more specific level, at a more tactical level, like, okay, this means we change this button, right? Or like whatever the recommendation is on a more specific level. So depending on like where your team's at and how kind of proactive they are and how they if they understand how to connect those dots, you can adapt this based off of needs. Has anyone used anything else in this phase in order to take action? I think taking action on findings is always the hardest part, because I don't know, there's some kind of like serotonin rush that you're like, oh yeah, I learned something, or like I was completely wrong, or I was completely right. And then it's like the findings don't go anywhere because everyone's so excited. But then it's like, no, we have to take action based off of this. Are there any other things that you would recommend in this phase?
I just really like your recommendation. I mean, having everyone involved at every point and increasing engagement, I would think would be a great way to increase actions. So I think that's fantastic.
Yeah, and it definitely takes more work to be able to do that. So I think it's like, if you have the bandwidth to be able to do that, like I try to have these tools or like kind of hands-on guides set up along the way, so I can just like send them off to people. So for example, if I know we're going into a moderated interview, I have like a deck set up about like, hey, here's what you should be prepared for. This is what you should be thinking about. Here's your role. Here's the mindset. And I have those all set up. And so then I just send them to people. And then I say like, hey, do you have any questions? And please make sure to read this through beforehand. So the more I'm starting to develop kind of more of those like little help me cards or like help me decks along the way, so that people can easily jump in there and feel like, I don't want them to feel dumb and like, I don't know what I'm doing here. I want them to feel like you're a part of this, you can understand it, and you can add value. And so like, if I can get people smart about it and excited, then it's like, then carrying it through, then we're going to have more likely to have taken actions downstream. All right, wrapping things up. Not everyone is available all of the time. We all know that we're all busy, and I think it's a matter of sometimes targeting the right types of people to come in and in the right type of activity. So if you have a C-level, C-suite level person, you know that they might be limited on time. How can you maximize like 30 minutes here, 30 minutes there, or making sure they're in the right type of activity that would provide the most value? That's always a judgment call. But I think that people can be more involved than they currently are. It just takes a little bit extra work. I think that UX research practices should actively give time to this. The more mature our UX research practice is, it's easier to have more buy-in and involvement, even though there are like competing priorities. And I've just seen that hands-on experiences are really powerful. So people kind of understand it once they're immersed. And so if you're in a company that's just trying to build out your practice and people are kind of like, what is this user research? I don't understand. These are perfect methods to start to build that firsthand experience so that people can start to see its impact and experience it hands-on. So in conclusion, really, this is all to help teams work better together, work smarter together, and then stay aligned. So thanks so much for letting me come today. Please let me know if you have any additional methods or questions. I'm happy to hang out for a bit.
Awesome. Thank you, Jami. So I have a question just about this, because just in my former life working, for corporations, there was always trouble sometimes with getting them involved, or, they're on the team, but they're not involved, they're not participating, they're not sharing ideas or anything like that. What have you done in that situation to kind of increase their involvement and get them participating so they get that buy-in?
I'll try to get the smallest type of activity, or a situation where the stakes are relatively low, right? So ideation might be really risky, especially for somebody who doesn't view themselves as creative, right? So maybe it's just like, what is the smallest, it's like the MVP of user research observation, right? Like, what is the most lowest stakes thing? Maybe they just come to a usability test and they watch the first 20 minutes. Maybe it's 40 minutes long, but it's like, hey, can you come for the first 20? I feel like it's relatively low stakes, and it's hard to be wrong when you're just watching. And so like, and a huge part of this has been relationship building, because I've had certain partners where it's like, they're just like, all right, just crank it out and tell me what I need to do. But they're not really getting at the spirit of empathy. And so part of that is just like having those one-on-one conversations and really understanding where they're at, respecting where they're at, but then also pushing and saying like, hey, like, I think we need to stretch our empathy muscle, or like we need to be thinking about this user, not as a number, right? But as a person, living, breathing thing, or being. And
difficult in any of the research that we do. Like getting people like, this is an actual person.
Yeah. So starting small, I would say, and then relationship building. Those are the two most important things.
Yeah, I really liked some of the ideas you had about like keeping everyone on track, because that is when you're working, in a team, or even just you're running the main project and there's other people voicing input and things like that. Keeping them on track of the research question is sometimes a monumental task. Because they're like, ooh, but let's go this direction. You're like, no, we're answering this right now. Get the blinders and things like that. So you had some great ideas on how to accomplish that. That was fantastic. I've been in that situation many a time, and I'm the person, I'll do it too, right? I mean, we're curious folks, so You know, we can get off on tangents as well.
Absolutely. I mean, it focuses everyone. Well, like somebody wrote a comment, I like how this breaks silos. Absolutely. So that's the idea, is like you bring in a developer, right? Like somebody who's like, oh, I just develop code. And you're like, no, actually, you're gonna care about the user. I love that. Those moments where somebody has that epiphany and they're like, oh, I wouldn't have seen that, or like thought that they would use it this way. And then it's like they're bought in, and then they're like, oh my gosh, okay, I have to watch this every time now. So definitely like getting that cross pollination and different points of view from like business leaders versus product people
Absolutely.
versus developer. Man, it's just so powerful having so many different points of views.
I agree. Yeah, it makes for better research overall. If we can get that involvement and
Yes. Yeah.
not have to evangelize all the time.
Yeah. Exactly.
Excellent. But I don't see any more questions, but if anybody has questions, we can send them your way, Jami, or if they have your contact information, I don't know. You can always send it that way. But we appreciate your time. I thoroughly enjoyed that. I'm not a user researcher, but I think everything you talked about is applicable to some form of research. You can take that and put it out. So I enjoyed it immensely. Thank you very much. Appreciate your time. I will go ahead and put up a slide until we have our next speaker in 19 minutes. And again, guys, if you have any questions, you can still send them our way for Jami. Thanks so much, Jami.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.